I'm pleased to introduce this afternoon's industry panel, not individually, but just as a focus. The panel will focus on the how of enterprise service management. Okay, for many organizations, enterprise service management becomes an attempt to replicate ITSM outside of the walls of IT. And that's certainly one approach, but is it the most effective approach? But it may be much more valuable to think of it in terms of the function and challenges faced by the business units separate from the IT component. In other words, how do they see their challenges? That requires leaning in and learning how those units actually operate, where they add value to the overall organization mission. Okay, so today's panel is going to discuss the questions they've used personally as a collective group of experts to understand how those functions work through the service management lens, and then how the enterprise service management can help teams create maximum value. This panel today is led by HDI's principal analyst, Tim McElligin. And so let's welcome Tim and this panel to the stage for a wonderful afternoon, shall we? Thanks so much, you guys. Come on out here, Tim. Oh my gosh. You guys look.
All right. Hello, y'all. Welcome to today's keynote, The How of Enterprise Service Management. I'm Tim McElligin. I'm the principal analyst for HDI. I'm really happy to be back in person with all of you here in Orlando. Thank you all for joining us. I'm very excited and honored to help share the insights and the experience of this amazing panel of HDI thought leaders as they help us all think about the opportunities and the real world, I'll get there, the real world challenges excuse me, of adopting a service management mindset and expanding service management frameworks and practices beyond the IT function. Joining me today are Marie DeRuza, Valence Howden, and Erika Flora, not in that order. I'm sorry, I messed that part up. Marie is the Director of Campus Technology and Media Support at Mount Holyoke College. A nationally recognized leader in the support industry, Marie has served as a EDUCAUSE working group. I'm really having a little trouble today. It's your fault, Rick. You kept me out too late. Maria served as an EDUCAUSE working group contributor and on customer advisory boards for multiple ITSM product teams. Valence Howden is a principal analyst at Infotech Research Group with more than 30 years of IT experience in IT, focusing on the areas of service management, enterprise and IT governance, strategy development and execution, I'm blaming you, Rick. I really am. Risk management, metrics, and process design. And Erika Flora is the CEO of Beyond20 and the lead editor and author of Idle 4 Leader, Digital and IT Strategy, with a passion for improving how operations manage the flow of work, deliver great products and services, and better serve their customers. When not at work, you can find her cycling, reading, sailing, or performing improv comedy. So keep in mind, she's the only one up here who knows how to handle a heckler and how to dodge tomatoes. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to put this all in context. It's important to recognize that service management is a mindset and a way of thinking about how the work of each department, each individual in those departments, adds value in achieving an organization's mission and servicing their customers. And rather than a set of specific digital capabilities, a box of tools, service management, and specifically enterprise service management, is first a process of identifying, evolving, and nurturing that chain of value-added activities to achieve business outcomes and accomplish the mission of your organizations. In today's conversation, we're going to focus on how organizations can begin adopting that mindset and identifying their unique value chains. We'll explore the critical drivers that help organizations decide where to invest in people, in training, and technology. We'll explore the day-to-day challenges and stumbling blocks that most, if not all, organizations encounter as they work to unleash the value of enterprise service management. So, to kind of set the stage a little bit, we just wrapped up our 2022 State of Service Management Survey. I'll be talking about that tomorrow. I hope you'll all join us for that. One of the questions we asked was, what do the respondents call the application of service management and practices and capabilities outside of IT? So top selections in order were digital transformation, service management, IT service management, enterprise service management, and digital workflow enablement. I'm going to start with you, Valence. Do you think it matters? Are these things similar enough, or do we really need to be more careful in what we call this activity and our definitions?
I would say that we have to be a lot more careful And I'm sorry, my voice carries a lot even without a microphone, so apologies. But I think there's a lot of care that has to be placed in terms of the use of the terminology. And I say that because things like digital transformation, you ask 20 people, there's 20 answers. So if we don't define what these things are, how can we actually talk about how we apply them in an organization effectively? The other thing we have to be really careful when we talk about extending it is people have executed services across domains in business long before there was an ITSM glint in our eye. So we have to remember that people know how to deliver services. People know how they deliver their workflows. So when we want to extend it out, we have to really look at service management, which is a capability of a business and an organization that we have applied to IT, and enterprise service management, which takes it back to how do we manage services and the work we do at a business level. So if we come up with common definitions of what that is, it changes what you apply and how you apply it. And it also requires us to have some humility, which is we may not be the best at some of the elements. So just because we want to take it out there doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing, and we can't learn from them as well.
Erika, do you, when you're working with clients, do you seek agreement on sort of concepts, topics, and definitions?
So I think kind of based on what you were just saying, what I found to be most successful is really understand what are the pains that other folks in our organization are having. If you go guns blazing with, we're doing enterprise service management, they're going to go, cool, not listening to you at all. But instead, what problems are we trying to solve as an organization, and how can we together elevate the services that we provide to customers, whether they be internal or external? We're going to have a lot more success that way.
It did go a little bit dim there at the end. Marie, you're working with academics and students, and they can get pretty picky about labels and definitions. What's your take on the importance of differentiating between ESM and these other somewhat related concepts before you even, as you're getting started?
I think what's important is having a common language and making sure there's a shared understanding of how those definitions are getting used. So engaging with stakeholders, understanding and making sure that the terminology that is getting used resonates with them, that it's consumable. This is why sound bites are so valuable, right? It has to have meaning for folks. It has to be sticky. The message has to be reinforced. So whatever terminology is being used, as long as there's a collective understanding of what those terms are, and that those terms are being reinforced through messaging, through marketing campaigns, through project management, I think that's really what's important. Great.
So let's move on to a broad overview that, for me anyway, highlights the applicability of service management across all sorts of functions within an organization. And I'm going to start with you, Marie, on this one. In an academic environment, your team serves a pretty varied set of customers. From the outside, at least, the needs of a business school are rather different from those of the liberal arts group, and that's very different from, say, financial aid or facilities management.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Even if it's feasible to create a common experience for all of the faculty and staff and students, is it primarily a technology challenge, and how does service management play into that effort for you?
Well, I think at its core, service management is about adding value for customers and employees and helping them to achieve the outcomes that they need. And clearly, the desired outcomes for admissions is going to be very different than the desired outcomes for an academic department, like the art department. So I do think there needs to be a conversation about what is it that we're trying to achieve, what is the value, where can we add value? Sorry, I was teaching all day. I'm losing my voice. And personalizing whatever the experience is to make sure that we're meeting those needs.
Valence, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your experience helping clients to think about service management in the context of, as we said as it says in your bio, governance, strategy development, execution, risk management, process design, et cetera. Where do you start? Do you advise them to start by addressing each part of that separately, or is it important to help them align their thinking across all the various activities right from the beginning?
I would say normally you want to align thinking across all those different domains, but I always start off with sort of getting a sense of governance is a really critical thing that gets undervalued because people don't understand what it is and how it applies. It's not a committee, it's not your leadership, it's how my organization makes decisions, how we just drive ourselves towards value, all the things that are required. So if I have something that talks about how do we govern ourselves, What are the goals we have as an organization? What's material to us? What do we actually deliver that's of value? So all those things come into the governance space of let's decide what we are as an organization and what we provide. So if I have to build a service management strategy, especially if I'm trying to sell it to someone, I better be able to show how the service management elements that I'm putting in at an enterprise or even at a ground level affect those things that matter. So if I don't understand what value is, how do I drive service management in a way that matters to my organization? How do I make improvements that are material to them? If I don't understand how my service produces value to things that matter, how do I know what's at risk when I make decisions around my services? If I don't understand materiality of risk, how does this affect our organization? I don't understand where a decision I make at any level in the services that I deliver affect my organization positively in terms of exploiting a risk, or negatively, it generates a gap that creates a risk to our organization. So if I don't understand value and that layer of governance, I don't know how to apply ESM. I don't know how to apply practices effectively, and I don't know the impact they have when I do it. It's the same way when we talk about how do I build a service management process? What's the first thing you do? Define the goal of it. What is it supposed to produce for us? If I don't have a goal, how do I know if it's effective? How do I know if the efficiency gain is useful? So if I don't have something that governs what it's supposed to produce, how am I actually using it effectively, and how do I sell that to somebody? How do I sell value if I don't know what it is and someone can't define that aspect for me and keep it aligned? So you have to look at it together, but you have to understand how the different elements affect the decisions you're going to make and the strategy you're going to build, because some things, they're going to progress in a different order based on the constraints you have in those areas.
So focus on the final outcome. What do we actually produce? What is the service? What is the value we deliver to our customers? And work back through
and I'll just add, if you work in something like government or anything that's very hierarchical in nature, you also have to understand what the governance is willing to accept. I cannot move you to something different if your governance will pull it back. So if we don't change how I govern, I can't change my style of work. And that affects how I can apply ESM. If they're not willing to play ball and they have power, you're not going anywhere. So you have to know how to deal with power and influence when you're trying to move the needle on this.
Great, thank you. And for you, Erika, as you're working with organizations of different sizes across different industries to improve their effectiveness and deliver value across their workflows and to their customers, where do you start their journey? What's your elevator speech to a CFO or a head of HR or a director of training when they ask you, what is ESM and what does it mean in the context of my organization or my people?
So usually they don't ask that question. Usually when they reach out, it's with a problem. Hey, we want to transform how we're working as an organization, and we don't have the time or the resources or sometimes the knowledge on how to get there. And so I just ask a lot of questions. What are the struggles that you're having? What are you trying to get to? Kind of like what you were saying. What's the goal? What are we trying to achieve, and what does success look like? And then let's figure out, I know I'm bringing enterprise service management to them in some cases, but that's not the conversation we have. It's almost like, how do we get better as an organization and use enterprise service management to help us do that? So it's really just starting by understanding what's the problem, and then let's map out a course to help you get there.
So you don't really want to lead with, here's this thing that we're going to apply. It's really start talking to them first about what are their problems. So let's dive in a little bit deeper now, and I'm going to stick with you, Erika. In your view, what are the 3 or 4 most critical things ESM leaders need to explore as they prepare to launch or perhaps reroute an ESM journey?
So I would say there's 3 things. There's people, process, technology, but it's in that order. And I think that's what we get wrong. We start with the technology, and there is such amazing technology, and I have to say that that's really propelled the conversation, because a lot of times what will happen is with us, our customers will usually start in IT, sometimes not at all in IT, marketing or sales or something, a different group will come to us, but usually it's IT, and we help them figure out their processes and figure out their services and roll out and automate how they work through technology, and then other departments start seeing what they're doing, and they're like, oh, I want that. I want that for us too. And so it's kind of like, we kind of expand it just through, not osmosis, but it's kind of like through just like it spreads like wildfire, which is kind of exciting. I don't know what I was talking about, but yes.
And Marie, what would you put at the top of your list?
I would just echo what Erika was saying about, organizational change management has to be at the forefront. What is the plan for getting people on board with making such a big change? The way that I see it, building upon what you were saying, I think there are two pathways to enterprise service management. I think there's the strategic, intentional pathway where people actually understand and are committed and are aware of what enterprise service management value it can bring. And then I think there's the most likely pathway, actually, which is the organic approach, right? So we take things that we already have in place, IT service management solutions, and a program around IT service management, and we start to bolt on enterprise capabilities, things that are outside of IT, processes that an organization has been struggling with for a long time. They've seen IT be successful with applying these practices. And so then they bolt these things on and it grows organically over time. The successes are saying more people want to do it. And that's an okay approach. I think in practice, that's what happens in reality. I think the challenge with that is because there's not the strategy, there's not the governance, there's not the intention, is that at some point down the line, all of these bolt-ons, there's going to be some conflict, there's going to be some misalignment, and that's when people will have to stop and take a pause and say, okay, if we were going to actually do this with intention and think from a strategic level, what would we do differently and how would we move ahead?
Right. Val, same question. Would you add anything to our list?
I'm going to throw this in a slightly different direction. If I'm thinking about digital products, digital services, I'm not really necessarily, and the first thing I'd say is, what flavor of ESM are we talking about, is my very first question. There's a difference between extending capabilities to different parts of your organization, and then there's the aspect of, we as an organization deliver digital products and services as our value proposition. How do we manage services that we offer as an organization, and how do we apply service management capabilities to the design, the delivery, the execution, the optimization of the services we as an organization offer? We often get stuck in the tactics of how do we extend out the workflows, how do we extend out these aspects? Service management, when we talk about it, even in the context of IT, one of the first things we tell you, define what it is you offer. What's your portfolio of services? What do you do that is valuable to the organization? Extend that up and say, what is valuable to my business or my organization? Those are the services we provide. How are we going to apply these principles and capabilities to the execution of services at that layer? So you have to start off with, what is a service to us and what are we trying to manage as an organization, which is not necessarily your workflows. The second is, how are we going to collaborate on this? ITIL 4 talks about co-creation of value. Well, if we all own the value prop, how are we going to work together to generate that and stop thinking about it as how do we extend? It's how do we as an organization do this? So the first two things are that, and then how do we build an approach that's going to work for everyone? So we sometimes have to get out of the head of all we're doing is taking our ability to run request flows and stuff and extend them. Now let's look at what are the services that my organization offers that generate value, that protect value, that improve value, and how are we applying these capabilities to drive those three outcomes?
Right. And of course, we're watching that happen in real time at Twitter right now. And speaking of Twitter, Valence, I know you think a lot about how culture impacts employee engagement and organizational effectiveness. What's your current thinking about the impact of culture on how organizations understand and approach enterprise service management?
This is a bigger answer than I have time for, probably.
Well, we got a bit of time. We're all right.
But what I will say is you have to understand the culture you're working in. I'm Canadian. I'm in the US. Our countries have incredibly different cultures about certain things. When you're operating, for example, in a very individualistic culture where we want to make our own decisions, you have to approach it very differently if I want people to collaborate and work together for a common anything. It's very different when you're in a culture that naturally collaborates. So the first thing you have to understand what your culture will bear, which goes very much with what your governance can take. What is my culture like? Because that's not just going to tell you what you can do, it's going to tell you how long it's going to take. There are barriers you may have to break down, there are champions you may need to find, there are different elements that you have to deal with your natural way of working the natural mindsets that drive the way work gets done, and people's need to control what they do. If they don't want to collaborate, it's very hard to drag it in without real, or even if you have a top-level push, people will resist it in a ton of ways. So you have to figure out how I'm going to deal with resistance based on that culture, how I'm going to deal with the behaviors that are in my organization, so that if we can show the value of this, people are going to be willing to come on board. So it becomes much more of a sales effort depending on the culture you're working in, and you have to understand people to sell to them. You're not going to just go in and say, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, I don't need sliced bread. So, we're done. If you don't understand the language that value is to them, you can't speak to it. And you can't affect the culture in any way around that. So like I said, there's a lot more in this. I'm just trying to condense, but,
Oh, keep going. We do have some more time. But, Erika, I know you always start from the human side of your clients' challenges and their opportunities. And do you see cases where an organization's culture might need to change, perhaps drastically, before ESM can have the intended impact? And can you give us some anonymous examples of that?
Sure. So a lot of thoughts here. I think culture changes when the environment changes, and also when folks are part of the solution. I've seen a lot of times where we'll train all of organization's IT organization, and then other folks from other parts of the organization will come to an ITIL class, like marketing or sales, and they have this kind of epiphany about halfway through class. They're like, wait a minute, this is all about just serving our customers and providing really good services, and I do that too, and it will they'll bring it back to their groups and start to change and socialize it there. And so I think it just takes some excited people around what's possible to champion change for the culture to change and to see success, whether it be within IT or elsewhere, and they get really excited about what's possible. So let me give you an example. We have a customer that one of their IT leaders said, hey, we can take asset management, what we're doing around asset and configuration management, and we can use it in other parts of our organization. So we have customers that we're doing this to manage their fleets. We have a customer that does these really cool, it's like virtual reality that the Army uses with suits, and there's 18 different pieces to these suits that have to go with the suits, and they're very expensive. And so they're using service asset and configuration management to manage all the assets and how they're being repaired and managed and things like that, and they were able to save 50% of their maintenance costs through that. And that's not even in IT, like really cool stuff that we're seeing. I'm seeing a lot of the same kind of thing with agility. 20 years ago, it started with weird software developers getting really excited about Scrum and extreme programming and all this kind of stuff, and people were like, we don't care about that. And now everybody talks about it, and the same is happening. I'm seeing a lot of the same kinds of things happening with ESM.
Great. And it sounds like, it's really important to find those ambassadors, right? And I forget which sociologist talks about the power of a very small group of committed people to affect drastic change, really significant change. Marie, should our audience expect to encounter culture-driven speed bumps? Any advice on how to help IT teams address those?
Yeah, I think, we talked about this actually in our session that we did today, our workshop. We actually had an activity around identifying what potential barriers might be to enterprise service management adoption. And there was a striking resemblance to the types of barriers we ran into when we were trying to tackle this for IT service management. Issues that came up were things like legacy, people who have been there for a really long time, just ideologies baked into a culture that seem to be part of that culture, and that sort of thing. We talked about territorialism, which is not unlike, the siloed effect. I think those are the types of things that we need to be able to at least identify before we travel down this path, because I think if you can identify what potential barriers you might have and really think through potential approaches to breaking down those barriers and engaging with the folks that you need to get on board to be those champions, I think that will really make a difference, so that when you hit one of those barriers, you have a plan. You know what you're going to do. You know how you're going to address that particular issue. I think the other thing I'll say is just on the topic of silos and legacy specifically, I think the issue is that we don't necessarily have the structural components in place to support enterprise service management at enterprise scale. And so it's really hard for people to forget what they know about their organizational structures in order to center the user experience, the employee experience, the customer experience, whatever that is. In our case, it's the student experience. And that makes it really challenging. So I think that has to be part of the conversation too. We have to give people permission to elevate their thinking and think holistically and think above and beyond traditional boundaries, organizational boundaries, departmental or divisional boundaries. And that's really hard because that's how our structures are set up. I mean, all the budgeting happens by divisional lines and all of these things. So if we were to take our strategic, intentional approach to service management, I think we have to consider what does a new enterprise service management enabling organizational structure look like? What roles do we need? Where do we need to change our way of thinking about how services are delivered and the governance structures and all of those things? So I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Sure. Okay.
I had just one really quick point to add there. If you really want to try to dig out from some silos and get people to collaborate, you probably have to change how they're measured. If I'm being measured on individual things that I have to accomplish and they're in conflict with what you do, I'm going to go with what I'm measured against, what my performance expects, what my team is expected to do. So if I want people to work together, I can't reward individualistic work. I have to measure us together, success together, or else what I'm going to be measured on success for will force me to work differently. It will force me away from what we're trying to do as in ESM. So if you have to understand, we change performance measures. We change what our leaders are measured on. If I want collaboration, we measure them on collaborating. Mm-hmm. So we make that their success criteria. It drives them to the behavior that's going to make us successful too. If you don't plan for that, that will undo a lot of your attempts as well.
Yeah. And I think at this point there's a pretty broad agreement that IT really shouldn't be leading enterprise service management efforts as such, right? Changes in organizational processes and procedures are still going to inevitably include IT teams just by the nature of what we're trying to accomplish. And other departments are going to come to you guys and they're going to say, you know, help us understand what service management means. What does it do? Why do we care? Maria, I know, and you've talked about this already tonight, or this afternoon, I should say. You talk about this in your training classes, but how can IT leaders make sure that their teams are ready to deal with those interactions effectively? And what sorts of training might they need, new sorts of training might they need in order to be effective ambassadors in ESM?
Yeah, I mean, I really think the through line is around organizational change management and understanding what that means and what their role is in helping to, whether it's being part of one of those coalitions that are going to champion the process, or if it's more around helping business units who may not actually have any of their processes defined to actually understand how do we build out a workflow, how do we do the process mapping work, how do we rethink our approaches to the way that we do things. I also think, you know, it's interesting because there's not really a practice area around enterprise service management that's defined in a way that there's a book you can read on it. And so I think there's an opportunity there to actually collectively and collaboratively build out some materials for folks to be able to understand what does this mean. But I do think because IT has been doing some of this work for a while, that they can be really effective and helpful champions in helping to create awareness about the value, service management, and a focus on centering the user experience, the employee experience, the customer experience can have, and really making sure that people are having conversations about value and about desired outcomes and making sure we're achieving those.
Yeah. And Valence, how do you talk to tech teams about what ESM might mean in their daily lives, right? What does it mean about how I work and what I have to do? And help them embrace and help to lead this process instead of reacting to it and resenting it.
I think it's a hard one primarily because we've always done a poor job of helping our technical teams understand where they're involved with the provision of organizational value. We talk a lot about the tasks we do, We talk a lot about the activities we do. We talk about the incidents we handle, which is great, but that's usually when your service has lost value. That's not a value proposition to sell. That's what I do when I'm not giving you value anymore. So we don't focus our discussion with the tech teams on what do we do that generates value for our organization or protects it, as I always mention. There are things we do with technical debt, that is, we prevent loss of value through that. That is valuable to an organization. But if they don't understand where they fit in the provision of value, it's very hard to have this conversation. So you have to switch the angle and show how what they do generates value from an organizational perspective. Because once they understand where they fit, it's easier to get them on board in terms of, well, we're going to look at how we're going to work together to improve things that affect the value at the customer or consumer level. So if I understand what they need and where I fit, I can tell you how optimizing it makes a difference. And they also understand why what they do is valuable and what they can bring to it. So if they understand that they have a good understanding of how to execute request flows, well, that's something that might be useful over here. If they understand that other teams might have skills that would help them better manage it, they can use it. So once they understand where they fit and how they sort of tie into the value prop, it's easier to have a conversation that says, this is where you fit, this is how it helps, this is how it makes you better. And part of it is helping people understand it's not an attempt to get rid of them. It's not an attempt to, dig away their responsibilities, but it is a way of helping us get better as an organization because that is our end goal. It's hard to get people to remember sometimes there's no need for finance without the organization. There's no need for IT without the organization. So you have to give them context for what their value is in the organization to drive towards this.
Yeah, and I think that points out the critical aspect of intentional communication. You've got to set up those chains, those lines of communication between all the different groups so that we do understand what the others are doing and how we might add value and how we might get in the way sometimes as well, right? So, Erika, what advice do you give clients in this regard, and for that matter, to our audience?
I think the advice that I would give to myself and I give to our team is to get rid of the jargon and to really be curious, to speak to others and understand really what they're struggling with and speak to that. So for example, if people come to me and say, hey, we're going to do something that's going to save our company a lot of money, I'm listening to that. We're going to get rid of processes and practices and ways of working that suck, that are painful. We're going to make our customers really, really happy with the work that we do. We're going to increase revenue. We're going to be able to scale and get out of our own way and break down some of these silos where we cause ourselves so much pain and suffering, where we're doing rework and missing out on really serving our customers in the way that we are capable of. I think that kind of stuff, if we lead with that, there's so much success behind that.
Okay, last few questions before we open the doors and open the bar. So Erika, what do you see as the most important benefits of ESM for the organizations that do embrace it? I know it's a tiny question.
Yeah, so kind of along the same lines, I think it's just really doing a good job with this makes our lives easier, makes our customers' lives easier, allow us to go home and be excited about the job that we did rather than exhausted by it.
Great. Marie, can you share your view of the toughest challenges? I mean, you've been through some of this, some of the toughest challenges for service management pros in unlocking the value of ESM?
Yeah, I think it's, it's always a challenge to shift our thinking away from what it is we're doing to why we're doing it, and making sure that we're considering and centering, I've said that a couple of times, but really centering that employee, customer, user, student experience in a way that helps us to understand where we can add value and what that experience is like for them. It's thinking about that value chain, but also thinking about what is the experience like and where are there opportunities for us to actually improve the experience, which adds value for us oftentimes by improving the processes and regaining capacity in order to focus on higher level work that we want to do. And I think there's just lots of opportunities.
Yeah, and that can't happen at a philosophical level. The only way you're going to find that out is by asking those questions of the people who are doing the work. Valence, you get the last word today. What's your takeaway message for our audience? Why ESM and why now?
I never get the last word, so this is kind of awesome. But only two things that really pop to mind. One is really keep your mind sort of focused on the broader view of a service. We're in an era of transformation where digital products and digital services are what a lot of organizations offer. And if we're the means of value provision for our organizations, we are the products that we offer, we are what's consumed, then we have to look at how we manage services end to end, not just aspects of the work. We need to look at everything. And the second thing I would say is understand the different practices that are around that you're going to have to integrate ESM with. If you're doing product management and scaled agile or something like that, you cannot just flow in with ESM. It does not work that way. So how do they work together? How do we integrate different styles, different speeds, different aspects of work? So you want to look at adaptability. And I'm not going to say agile, because agile is an aspect of that. How do I adapt to the way my organization needs to run? Where does it apply? Where does it not apply based on things we're doing? You're going to wind up, in a lot of cases, in a hybrid state of work, and that is fine. It applies here. It doesn't necessarily apply as well there. So understand where it applies. Understand the services so you can understand how broad you need to go. And I think you said something very specific, Erika, which is get rid of the jargon. If I want to talk about what is it that we provide that's of value, talk about it. Take the service management terminology away, take the product management, the scaled agile, and talk about what is it we do. If you ask those teams to talk about what they produce and get the jargon out, they're going to sound very similar. And that foundation of similarity will allow you to have these conversations in a more meaningful way. I've talked to product managers a lot. And when I say, okay, describe product management without using any product management terminology, I'll describe service management without it, they sound very similar, because they are. They come from different angles of doing the same work. So if you can get away from it, you can find some commonality that'll make it easier to use these capabilities.
Great. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you guys so much for joining us and helping us think through this stuff. I know I'm a lot smarter than I was 20-some minutes ago, for sure. So thank you, Valence. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Marie. And thank you to our audience for being here with us. Let's keep this conversation going as you enjoy the rest of HDI Service Management World 2022 in person. Right? Enjoy it. Thank you.